Okay, let's dive in. When you picture the American West, I bet one image really leaps to mind more than pretty much any other, right? The saguaro cactus.
Oh, absolutely. Those towering, almost arm-waving giants. They're completely iconic.
They really are. And today, we're doing a deep dive into, well, the heart of where these amazing plants thrive, Saguaro National Park.
Exactly. And it's so much more than just, a collection of cacti. It's a really critical sanctuary for the unique life of the Sonoran Desert. It's a place just steeped in history, and as the material you shared shows, it's facing some pretty fascinating challenges today.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack this stack of sources you gave us, pull out the most important nuggets, and help you really get what makes this park, and of course its namesake cactus, so special, and also what its future might look like.
Yeah.
And what's interesting right off the bat is that this park isn't just one single piece of land, is it?
No, that's one of its really unusual features. It's actually split into two different districts. One's east and one's west of Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
You've got the Rincon Mountain District to the east and the Tucson Mountain District over to the west. And this split, this geographical separation, it's actually key to his whole conservation strategy.
How so?
Well, because it means the park protects a much broader range of the Sonoran Desert's incredible diversity.
Yeah.
And it offers visitors pretty different experiences in each section.
Okay, so a park in two pieces, defined by this one truly remarkable plant. Let's start right there with the star, the saguaro cactus itself, Carnegie gigantea. Your sources really stress its pivotal role.
Oh, they definitely highlight it as a keystone species. Think of it like the cornerstone in an arch, maybe.
Hmm.
It has this outsized influence on the whole ecosystem compared to its actual numbers.
Okay.
Provides essential food and shelter for just so many other desert creatures.
And it's not just ecologically central, right? It's also woven really deep into the human story of this region.
Absolutely. I mean, it holds immense cultural and spiritual significance,
Mm.
especially for indigenous peoples like the Tohono O'odham.
Right.
They've traditionally harvested its fruit for food, for ceremony, and they actually regard the saguaro as sacred, sometimes even as ancestors.
Wow.
And beyond that, of course, it's Arizona's state flower and just an unmistakable symbol of the state itself.
It's amazing that something that seems so, well, static can be so foundational. And speaking of foundational, let's maybe walk through the saguaro's life cycle because it's quite a journey and it really makes you appreciate every single big cactus you see out there.
It truly is a saga. It starts as this tiny little seed inside the saguaro fruit, but, the odds are really stacked against it right from the beginning. The sources suggest only about maybe 1 in 1,000 seeds will ever actually make it to maturity.
1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
Seriously. So just sprouting is kind of a miracle then.
Pretty much, yeah. And for those super rare few that do manage to sprout, survival often hinges on finding shelter under what's called a nurse plant.
A nurse plant.
Yeah, like a Palo Verde tree or maybe a creosote bush.
Hmm.
Their shade gives crucial protection from that intense sun and heat during the first incredibly vulnerable years.
So they really need a helping hand just to get started. And that early growth is famously slow, right? Like really slow.
Oh, painfully slow. Maybe just an inch or two in the entire first year.
Wow.
Over the first decade, it might only reach, say, a foot or two tall. At this stage, they're mostly just putting energy into establishing a strong root system. And they're still super susceptible to drought, frost, and, being eaten by animals.
And the famous arms, you're waiting a very, very long time for those to show up.
Decades. They grow just as a single column through their juvenile phase, though the growth speeds up a little bit. The first flowers, which signal, sexual maturity, they typically don't even appear until the cactus is around 35 years old.
35 years for flowers.
Yeah. And those arms we all recognize. They usually don't start forming until the saguaro is between, say, 50 and 75 years old, sometimes even later, depending on stress or genetics.
50 to 75 years just to start getting an arm. Man, it really puts their eventual size into perspective.
It really does. And they keep growing, slowly but surely. And they can reach these towering heights, 40, sometimes up to 75 feet, over lifetimes that can stretch maybe 200 years or even more.
Incredible. And the flowering itself is a pretty specific, almost fleeting event, isn't it?
Yes, it happens between April and June, typically. These large, really beautiful white flowers bloom right at the top of the mature saguaros, but they only open at night and usually last less than 24 hours.
Night blooming. So who pollinates them?
Well, they rely heavily on nocturnal pollinators,
Hmm.
especially the lesser long-nosed bat. That's a key one. Then in the morning, other pollinators like bees, insects, and birds like white-winged doves and hummingbirds take over.
Which then leads to the fruit, right? That bright red fruit that's like a lifeline for so many species.
Exactly. The fruit develops through June and July. A big saguaro can produce over 100 fruits in a good year, and when they ripen and split open, they're just this crucial food source. Animals like birds, coyotes, desert tortoises, they feast on them.
And spread the seeds.
And in turn, they disperse the seeds through their scat. It's this really beautiful example of mutualism right there in the desert.
It's amazing how central they are throughout their entire long lives. And even after they're gone, the saguaro keeps contributing, right?
That's one of the most fascinating parts, I think.
Hmm.
Even in senescence, old age and after death, the woody ribs can still be used by animals or people. And those hollowed out cavities where birds nested, they're famously called saguaro boots, they continue to provide shelter for smaller creatures.
So a dead saguaro isn't just gone, it's repurposed.
Exactly. It keeps giving back.
That's amazing resilience and adaptability. Beyond that incredible life cycle, what are some other key adaptations that let them survive the extreme heat and dryness out there?
Well, the ability to store water is obviously number one. A fully hydrated saguaro can absorb and hold, get this, up to 4,800 pounds of water.
Wow, that's like a small car's worth of water.
Pretty much. And their waxy exterior, that skin, it minimizes water loss, which is obviously crucial in such an arid place. And those formidable spines, they can be up to 3 inches long.
Yeah, you don't want to bump into those.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But they aren't just for defense. They also provide really crucial shade for the cactus body itself, kind of like a little parasol, preventing sunburn.
So food, shelter, massive water storage, shade. It really is the heart of the ecosystem. You mentioned the saguaro boots, elf owls, cactus wrens. They're famous for nesting in those, right?
Exactly. It just underscores this complex, intricate web of life. The saguaro isn't just some solitary plant standing there. It's actively enabling survival for countless others. And remember, it relies on those nurse plants when it's young and pollinators and animals for seed dispersal throughout its life. It's a remarkably delicate balance.
And that balance, it plays out differently across the park's two districts, doesn't it? You mentioned that earlier.
It really does, and that's why protecting both districts is so important. The park's split structure allows it to safeguard a wider slice of the Sonoran Desert's biodiversity, which, by the way, is often called the most biodiverse desert in North America.
Really? Why is that?
Well, partly due to relatively higher precipitation compared to some other deserts, but critically, it's because of significant differences in elevation within the park's region. These create really diverse microclimates.
Okay, so elevation equals different environments, different biotic communities, I think the source has called them.
Precisely. The Rincon Mountain District, the one on the east side, it has this really dramatic elevation range. It goes from about 2,670 feet all the way up to over 8,600 feet.
That's a huge difference.
It is, and it creates what scientists call a sky island effect.
Mm.
These are isolated mountain ranges that support ecosystems vastly different from the surrounding lowlands. So in the Rincons, you find 6 distinct biotic communities. 6. Yeah, ranging from desert scrub way down at the base all the way up through desert grassland, then oak woodland, pine oak woodland, pine forest, and even mixed conifer forest at the very highest elevations.
Pine forests in a desert national park. See, that's the kind of surprising nugget this deep dive is all about.
It really is kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Until you factor in that elevation, those higher spots mean more moisture and cooler temperatures. And that supports species you wouldn't expect in the flat desert, like black bears, Mexican spotted owls, white-tailed deer, and even unique reptiles like the Arizona mountain king snake.
Huh.
The average precipitation is higher there, too, around 12.3 inches annually.
Okay, so the Rincon district is like a whole different world up high. What about the Western district? The Tucson Mountain District? Is that more like classic desert?
Much more so. It's much lower in elevation, topping out around 4,687 feet.
Yeah.
So it primarily supports just 2 main communities, desert scrub and desert grassland. So that's where you'll more commonly encounter that classic desert wildlife coyotes, Gambel's quail, desert tortoises, and it gets less rain on average, about 10.27 inches.
So the basic principle here is pretty clear, though. Elevation and the climate it creates are the main drivers of where life can flourish in this desert landscape.
Exactly right. It's a perfect demonstration of how these environmental gradients shape species distribution and overall diversity.
Yeah.
And within these communities, you see specific plant adaptations too. Like in the desert scrub, plants like creosote bush have that waxy coating to reduce water loss.
Right.
And interestingly, those higher elevation forests, The pine and mixed conifer ones, they're actually adapted to fire. They need periodic burns, maybe every 5 to 15 years, as a natural process to stay healthy.
Okay, so fire up high is natural, but down low in the Saguaro Desert, it's devastating. That sounds like something important we'll probably come back to.
It is, yeah,
Okay.
especially with invasive species.
Right. But let's stick with the wildlife for just another moment. Beyond the birds nesting in saguaros, what are some other cool examples of how animals adapt to this really harsh environment?
We've got the mammals we mentioned, like coyotes, javelinas, jackrabbits in the lower areas, and then the bears and deer higher up in the rincans. Birds like the roadrunner are totally iconic, zipping around.
Yeah.
But reptiles are really the masters of desert survival here. You have Gila monsters, lots of different snakes, and of course desert tortoises. Many of them are crepuscular,
Crepuscular.
meaning they're most active during the cooler parts of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So dawn and dusk, mainly to avoid that brutal midday heat. And their dry, scaly skin is perfect for minimizing water loss in arid conditions.
Makes sense. Amphibians, though. Frogs and things. They sound like they'd have a much tougher time.
They absolutely do. I mean, their skin is porous, and they need water to reproduce, to lay their eggs. So
Right.
species like the lowland leopard frog or the canyon tree frog, they're pretty much confined to the scarce water sources, like springs or Tina's natural rock tanks.
And they face threats there.
Yeah, they face threats from introduced species like invasive fish or bullfrogs that prey on them or compete with them. The park actually has specific projects, like something called the Tanajas Project, focused on studying and managing these critical water resources for native species.
So the natural world here is incredibly complex, incredibly adapted. But your sources also paint this picture of a landscape that's been shaped by thousands of years of human presence, too.
Oh, absolutely. There's archaeological evidence showing pretty continuous human occupation for over 8,000 years. It starts way back with the Archaic period, and then later you have the Hohokam culture, which flourished from about 500 to 1450 CE.
And you can still find traces of them.
Definitely. You can find remnants of their presence all over old village sites, temporary camps, places they quarried stone, rock shelters they used, milling sites where they ground food.
And the rock art, the petroglyphs, those are generally attributed to the Hohokam, right?
Yes, they're believed to be the primary creators of most of the rock art found in the park. Signal Hill, over in the West District, is a really prominent and easily accessible site. It's got numerous carvings on the boulders, some dating back to the 13th
But
century.
how exactly did they make them? It looks so permanent.
They used harder stone tools to basically peck or sometimes incise a row of braid through the dark outer layer of the rock. It's called the desert varnish or patina. This reveals the lighter rock underneath, creating the image.
What kinds of images did they carve?
It's quite a mix, really. You see abstract designs, lots of geometric shapes, spirals are common, and also representational figures. Things like human-like forms, mountain sheep, deer, lizards, or snakes, sometimes plants too.
Do we actually know what all these images meant to them?
Well, their full meaning is largely lost to time, unfortunately. It's really open to interpretation. There are lots of hypotheses, Maybe they were hunting magic or fertility symbols, maybe boundary markers between groups, possibly records of important events, or even symbols representing clans or families. But honestly, we just don't know for sure. It remains this powerful, kind of silent link to the past inhabitants.
And that connection to the past really ties back to the deep cultural ties of indigenous peoples who live in the region today, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, yes. For groups like the Tohono O'odham, the saguaro and this whole desert landscape are absolutely central to their cultural and spiritual identity. As we mentioned, they view the saguaro as sacred, sometimes as ancestors. And the traditional harvesting of the saguaro fruit, often using long poles made from saguaro ribs, it's still a vital cultural practice, both for subsistence and ceremony.
And it wasn't just the Tohono O'odham, right? Other groups used the saguaro just as extensively.
Oh yes, absolutely. Peoples like the Pima, the Seri further south, they also used nearly every single part of the plant. The fruit was boiled down into syrup, those tough saguaro boots we talked about were used as containers, and the strong woody ribs were used for building shelters and making tools. It was incredibly versatile.
So the park has to manage these cultural resources too.
Exactly. The park's cultural resource management program works very closely with the affiliated tribes, and they adhere strictly to federal laws like NAGPRA, that's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It ensures respect for lineal descendants and tribes when it comes to handling cultural items or ancestral human remains found within the park.
So the park isn't just a repository of natural history then. It's more like a living archive of human adaptation and interaction with this desert environment over thousands of years.
That's a great way to put it. A living archive. and the park's own history, including, the tensions between resource exploitation like mining and the push for conservation that eventually led to its creation that reflects this ongoing dialogue between humans and the landscape.
Right.
The modern management approach, which includes that cultural resource management and following laws like NEPRA, it really recognizes the park as a whole cultural landscape where human heritage is completely inseparable from the natural environment.
And that conservation journey itself, getting this place protected, that's quite a story too, isn't it? This area didn't just instantly become a national park.
Oh, far from it. The initial big push for conservation really started back in the 1920s. It was driven by local conservationists and scientists there in Tucson, people like Homer Shantz. They saw the threats that were coming from homesteading and ranching and things like that.
So local people kicked it off.
Yeah, groups like the Tucson Game Protective Association were really key in getting that initial area, the Tonka Verde Cactus Forest, protected first.
Which eventually led to the National Monument designation.
Exactly. President Herbert Hoover declared it Saguaro National Monument back in 1933. But actually establishing the monument was complicated. It involved pulling together land from various owners, federal land, state land, private parcels, even land owned by the University of Arizona.
Hmm.
And then, during the Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, played a huge role. They built much of the park's early infrastructure, roads, trails, visitor facilities. Many of those structures are still standing today and are recognized for their historic value.
Right, the CCC legacy is all over the park system. And the Western District, the Tucson Mountains part, that came much later.
Much later, yes.
Hmm.
That was added in 1961. It had originally been part of Pima County's park system, and its inclusion followed a lot of public debate, actually, especially surrounding mining claims that were active in the area. Eventually, those were rescinded, partly thanks to strong public support for conservation.
So it was a national monument for what, over 60 years before it finally became a national park?
That's right. Congress officially elevated it to Saguaro National Park status in 1994. And since then, there have been additional land acquisitions that have expanded the park's protected acreage even further.
Besides the ancient petroglyph sites, are there other historical remnants that someone visiting today might, stumble upon or see?
Yeah, definitely. You can see evidence of more recent history scattered around. There are remnants of old ranching operations, signs of past mining activities, old lime kilns used for processing limestone, and the foundation of the Freeman Homestead over the East District. That's an easily accessible site where visitors can get a glimpse of that homesteading era.
So there are just layers upon layers of history, from ancient times right up to more recent eras, all woven into this landscape. For someone visiting today, how can they really experience all these different dimensions of the park?
Oh, there's some fantastic ways to engage for really easy access and just stunning views. The scenic drives are super popular. In the West District, there's the Bajada Loop Drive. It's a 6-mile gravel road, good for biking too, with lots of pull-offs to stop and look around or take a short walk.
Okay.
And then in the East District, you have the Cactus Forest Drive. That's an 8-mile paved one-way loop. It's really popular for road cycling as well as just scenic driving.
And hiking options. I imagine there are plenty.
Absolutely. For pretty much every level, you can find easy, short nature walks or really challenging mountain treks up into the rincons. But, and this is really critical safety advice here, always carry ample water. Way more than you think you'll need, especially in summer.
Good point.
Wear sun protection hat, sunscreen, sunglasses, and always check the weather forecast before you head out. Summer heat is no joke, and monsoon storms can pop up quickly.
Okay, safety first. What are maybe a couple of specific trails from the sources that offer different kinds of experiences?
Sure. For an easy introduction that includes some history, the Freeman Homestead Nature Trail in the East District is great. It's about a 1-mile loop, has interpretive signs explaining the history and the plants. You see the old Homestead Foundation, and it goes through a beautiful saguaro grove.
Nice.
To see those petroglyphs easily, the Signal Hill Trail in the West District is perfect. It's a very short walk, maybe 0.3 miles out and back, right up to these boulders covered in ancient carvings.
Okay.
For something a bit longer and moderate, maybe the Sendero Esperanza Trail in the West District. That offers really rewarding panoramic views from a ridge, and you can even extend it to climb Wasson Peak, which is the highest point in the West District.
You sound great.
Yeah, and there are others too, like the Garwood Dam Trail in the east for a historical site, or a spot called Pink Hill, also in the east, which is apparently excellent for sunset photos.
Speaking of photos, the light there sounds like it must be incredible.
It is absolutely renowned for it. Sunrises and sunsets are just spectacular. The low-angle light playing on the shapes and textures of the cacti is just magic.
Where are the best spots for that?
Well, the sources mentioned several. Pullouts along the Cactus Forest Drive in the east, like Javelina Rocks, are good. Or just hiking a little way up the Tanque Verde Ridge Trail near the Rincon Visitor Center. Over in the west, the Gates Pass overlook, which is technically just outside the park boundary but looks over it, is famous for sunsets.
And a big bonus of going at those times.
Much cooler temperatures,
Uh-huh.
especially important in the warmer months.
Yeah. It really sounds like a full sensory experience, the light, the air you mentioned.
Definitely. Visitors often comment on the incredible smell, especially after a rain. That sort of clean, creosote-scented desert air. Artists and photographers are obviously drawn to it. Some sources even had quotes about the saguaro skeletons looking like dehydrated art, or just saying it's so beautiful.
That's a lovely way to think about it, dehydrated art. Any other kind of unique experiences or maybe best-kept secrets people mention?
Well, one really major draw, especially given its location right next to a city, is its certification as an international dark sky park, specifically an urban night sky park.
Wow, right next to Tucson. That's impressive.
It is. The park has made a serious commitment to minimizing light pollution, preserving those dark skies that are becoming so rare near urban areas. It means it offers exceptional stargazing opportunities.
That's fantastic. Any funny or memorable visitor anecdotes that came up in the materials?
There were the almost obligatory cautionary tales about the teddy bear cholla cactus.
Oh, yeah.
People say it hugs you back because the barbed spines detach so easily if you brush against it, and they are really painful to remove.
Ouch. Note to self, give cholla wide berth.
Definitely good advice. More personally, some visitors talked about the sense of quiet contemplation the desert inspires. Anecdotes like talking to the cactus or finding joy in just sitting and doodling what you see.
That's nice.
And of course, there's always the excitement of trying to spot wildlife javelinas are pretty common, maybe foxes, sometimes even giant desert scorpions if you're careful, or maybe, if you're incredibly lucky, an elusive mountain lion.
Wow.
But that always comes with the absolutely crucial safety reminder. Never go off trail, please. The desert floor has this delicate biological soil crust. It's alive, and it's easily damaged by footprints. It can take decades, even centuries, to recover. So stick to the designated paths. Protect the very thing you came to see.
Protecting that fragile surface while exploring, that's really important advice.
It really is. Other options people might not think about include horseback riding. There are opportunities near both districts. And hey, you're visiting Tucson. Remember, it's a UNESCO city of gastronomy.
Right? You mentioned that.
Yeah, so checking out local restaurants like Saguaro Corners here, the East District, or the historic El Charro Cafe downtown, which claims to be the birthplace of the chimichanga, is a great way to round out the experience.
Nice. So the whole park experience is really multifaceted. Then you've got recreation, history, culture, art, quiet contemplation, even connecting with the local food scene.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's a much more immersive encounter than maybe people first realize. It really deepens your appreciation for this unique and fragile environment.
But this incredible protected place,
Yeah.
it isn't without its struggles, is it? Your sources were pretty clear that it faces some significant challenges.
It absolutely does, despite its protected status as a national park. The primary pressures are really interconnected, and they stem largely from climate change and the pressures of urbanization right at its edges.
How is climate change hitting the saguaros directly?
Well, it's a major, major concern. Average temperatures in Arizona have already risen significantly, about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the early 1900s, and the projections show continued, even accelerated, warming. This warming, combined with increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns, sometimes intense downpours, sometimes prolonged drought, is putting stress even on the big, mature saguaros. That extreme heat wave back in 2023, for example, actually caused many saguaros to lose arms due to heat stress.
Wow. And what about the difficulty for new young saguaros getting started? You mentioned how hard it is for them anyway.
That's perhaps the most alarming long-term impact we're seeing. Successful saguaro establishment.
Eh?
Young ones surviving those first critical years, it's strongly correlated with periods that have higher rainfall and relatively cooler temperatures.
Makes sense.
But since the 1990s, which have been marked by pretty prolonged drought and increasing heat, the rate of establishment of new saguaros has been worryingly low in many areas of the park.
Hmm.
Young saguaros are also very vulnerable to frost. and changing climate patterns can affect that risk too. Plus, increased temperatures mean higher evapotranspiration rates, basically. The soil dries out faster, which just makes drought conditions even worse.
So fewer new ones, making it more stress on the old ones. It sounds like a really tough future for them under continued warming.
It is. You've got diminished winter precipitation in some models, increasing spring drought,
Yeah.
maybe more intense summer monsoon storms that cause erosion. It all contributes to this cumulative stress.
And then on top of the climate stress, there are invasive species. Bufflegrass sounded particularly nasty in the reports.
It is perhaps the single biggest immediate ecological threat within the park. It's an invasive grass, originally introduced from Africa back in the 1930s, mostly for cattle forage and erosion control outside the park. But it's incredibly aggressive.
How does it hurt the native plants?
It just outcompetes them, especially vulnerable young saguaros and other native seedlings, for precious water and nutrients. It forms these dense stands that choke out the natives.
And it changes the whole fire situation dramatically, right? You hinted at that.
Crucially, this is the really dangerous part. Bufflegrass is highly combustible, and it creates this continuous carpet of fuel across the desert floor where there wasn't one before. Historically, Sonoran desert fires were pretty rare, usually small, and didn't spread very far or burn very intensely.
Okay.
Bufflegrass changes all that. It makes fires much more frequent, much larger, and much hotter. And native desert plants, especially saguaros, are simply not adapted to survive that kind of intense, recurring fire. Climate change also makes things worse by increasing the risk of fire-conducive weather conditions.
So let me get this straight. Climate change stresses the native plants and creates better conditions for invasives like bufflegrass, and then the bufflegrass creates the conditions for devastating fires that the natives can't handle. It's like a vicious feedback loop.
That's a perfect description. It perfectly illustrates how these threats are interconnected and how they amplify each other. It creates these really complex management challenges for the park's ecosystem.
And then alongside the climate change and invasive species issues, you've got the immediate pressure of the city of Tucson's growth right there on the park's doorstep.
Yeah, that adds yet another layer of stress. Urban sprawl encroaches on the park boundaries, replacing natural habitat with impervious surfaces like concrete and asphalt.
Right. Less habitat.
Less habitat overall, yes, but it also intensifies the urban heat island effect. Cities are significantly warmer than the surrounding natural lands. This adds even more thermal stress to the cacti and other organisms already struggling with the broader effects of climate change.
And other impacts from the city.
Sure. Urbanization also tends to introduce more non-native ornamental plants that could escape into the park, increases light pollution, which impacts those dark night skies we talked about, brings in airborne trash, and contributes to air quality concerns.
It really is a complex web of pressures the park is trying to navigate.
It absolutely is, and it demands a really multifaceted adaptive response. The good news is the park is actively implementing a range of proactive conservation strategies.
Okay, so what does that actually look like on the ground? What are they doing?
Well, a lot of it involves adaptive management. That means constantly learning from scientific monitoring and research, and then adjusting management strategies based on what they learn. Collaboration is also absolutely essential.
Collaboration with who?
With various partners. Organizations like the Trust for Public Land, or TPL, are key partners in land acquisition efforts. For example, the sources mentioned that just recently, on May 1st, 2025, TPL helped add nearly 50 acres across 2 parcels to the West District.
Oh, wow. So they're still adding land.
Yes, this is actually the 4th and 5th land addition, facilitated by TPL just in the last decade. They've helped protect over 2,300 acres for the park since 1993.
And adding land helps how? Exactly. What's the main benefit?
Well, several things. It expands the protected habitat base, obviously. It improves connectivity between different areas, which is vital for wildlife movement and maintaining genetic diversity. It can enhance public access for recreation in some cases. And crucially, it strengthens ecological links to surrounding conservation lands, like Pima County's Sweetwater Preserve, creating these larger, more resilient wildlife corridors.
Where does the money for that come from?
It's often funded by sources like the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund, along with support from local partners and foundations.
Okay, so land acquisition is one tool. What about restoration efforts within the park?
Yeah, that's huge too, often supported by partners like the National Park Foundation. In 2022, for instance, the foundation supported work that removed invasive vegetation, like bufflegrass, from over 3,700 acres.
Wow, that's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. And there are also projects focused on restoring critical habitats like streams and canyons, sometimes specifically to support rare native species,
Mhm.
like reintroducing the lowland leopard frog to areas where it had disappeared. And that systematic buffalo grass management, pulling it or spraying it, that's an ongoing, very labor-intensive effort every year.
And protecting the dark skies, that's considered part of active conservation, too.
Absolutely. Achieving and maintaining that urban night sky park certification isn't passive. It requires ongoing effort and commitment to manage lighting within the park and work with surrounding communities to reduce light pollution. It's about preserving a rapidly diminishing natural resource that benefits both wildlife and people's experience.
Makes sense. And what about monitoring the saguaros themselves? Are they keeping close tabs?
Oh yes, long-term scientific monitoring is absolutely fundamental. Park scientists and researchers continuously track the health, the growth rates, flowering success, death rates, and overall population dynamics of saguaros across both districts. They're looking closely at how these metrics respond to environmental changes like drought and heat. This data is absolutely critical for informing those adaptive management decisions we talked about.
It really sounds like a massive, coordinated effort involving a lot of different people and approaches.
It has to be. It requires broad collaboration. You need the scientists doing the research, the conservation groups helping acquire land, the park staff doing the restoration work, urban planners thinking about development near the park, local communities getting involved, policymakers providing support.
And the role of indigenous communities.
That's increasingly recognized as vital. The involvement of local tribes, particularly the Akamela Odom and the Tohono Odom, is crucial. Their deep cultural connection to this land and their centuries of traditional ecological knowledge about how to live sustainably in the desert offer invaluable insights that really complement modern scientific approaches.
So bringing it all together.
Exactly. Science provides the understanding, but collaboration provides the pathway forward. It's really a holistic vision, integrating strategic land conservation, hands-on habitat restoration, strong partnerships, and respectfully incorporating traditional ecological knowledge. The park isn't just a protected area, it's really become a living laboratory and, hopefully, a beacon for conservation in a rapidly changing world.
So, to kind of bring this deep dive toward a close, then, we've really explored Saguaro National Park as this vital sanctuary, not just for the iconic saguaro, but for the whole Sonoran Desert ecosystem. We've seen how remarkable it is with its dual nature, its rich layers of human history and culture, and of course, the incredible life cycle and adaptations of its namesake plant.
Yeah, and we've also seen that it faces really significant interconnected threats, mainly from climate change, those damaging invasive species like bufflegrass, and the pressures of urbanization creeping into the edges.
But also, importantly, that it's a place of ongoing, really proactive conservation efforts through things like strategic land acquisition, intensive habitat restoration, protecting those rare dark night skies, and fostering crucial collaborative efforts that increasingly include incorporating valuable indigenous knowledge.
And by learning about, appreciating, and maybe even experiencing this park firsthand, you, the listener, you really become a part of its story and its ongoing protection. It's so much more than just a place to go see giant cacti. It's truly a living legacy, and one that needs our collective help and awareness to safeguard for the future.
Yeah. And thinking about that legacy and that incredible life cycle we talked about way back at the beginning, one detail really stuck with me. How even when a saguaro dies, even in decay, its woody ribs and those hollowed-out saguaro boots continue to provide life and shelter for other creatures, sometimes for years after the cactus itself is gone.
It's such a powerful symbol, isn't it? Resilience, even through profound change. Contribution, even in its final form.
It really is, and it kind of makes you ponder this idea that even as landscapes shift and face enormous challenges like the ones we've discussed, there can still be these cycles of giving, of providing support for the wider ecosystem. It's this amazing symbol of resilience, not just for the saguaro itself or even just for the park, but maybe it holds a lesson for us for our own relationship with fragile ecosystems everywhere. What does that profound interconnectedness, that resilience right in the face of changing conditions, what does that teach us about how we can continue to support and sustain the life around us, even as our world changes so rapidly? Something to maybe keep in mind the next time you see one of these truly magnificent ancient giants.